The morning light streamed through the threadbare curtains of Eliza Mitchell's tiny studio apartment. She stood before her closet, carefully assessing her limited professional wardrobe. Today wasn't just any day, it was potentially life-changing. After months of applications and rejections, she'd finally secured an interview with Meridian Enterprises, one of the most prestigious companies in the city. "You've got this," she whispered to her reflection, smoothing down the front of her navy blue blazer, a thrift store find she'd painstakingly tailored herself. At 26, Eliza had learned to make the most of what little she had. Growing up in foster care had taught her self-reliance, while her subsequent struggles had instilled an unwavering determination. The stakes couldn't be higher. Her rent was due in 10 days, and the reminder emails from the student loan office were becoming increasingly frequent. The marketing coordinator position at Meridian would mean stability, healthcare, and the chance to finally use her hard-earned degree. Eliza gathered her portfolio, double-checked the contents of her purse, and headed out. The autumn air carried a crisp bite as she navigated the busy downtown streets. Meridian's headquarters towered above the city skyline, 60 floors of gleaming glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds themselves. Inside, the lobby hummed with purpose. Well-dressed professionals crossed the marble floors with confident strides, while Eliza approached the reception desk, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Eliza Mitchell for an interview with HR at 10 o'clock, she said, her voice steadier than her nerves. The receptionist smiled. "Please take a seat. Someone will be down shortly to escort you." 15 minutes later, a friendly young woman named Amara led her to a conference room on the 38th floor. "HR will be with you shortly," she explained, offering Eliza water. "Best of luck." Eliza took slow, deep breaths as she waited, reviewing the company information in her mind. Meridian had been founded 20 years ago by entrepreneur Alexander Blackwood, who had transformed it from a small startup into a global powerhouse. Though she'd researched extensively, she found surprisingly little personal information about the reclusive CEO himself. The door opened, and a woman in a tailored suit entered. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Patricia Donovan, Head of Human Resources. We'll be joined by our department director shortly for your interview." The next 45 minutes flew by as Eliza answered questions about her experience, education, and approach to marketing. Despite her nervousness, she felt the interview was going well. Patricia seemed impressed by her portfolio and thoughtful responses. "Well, Ms. Mitchell, I believe we've covered." Patricia began when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression shifting to surprise. "I apologize, but there's been a change of plans. Our CEO would like to sit in on the remainder of your interview." Eliza's heart raced. The CEO himself. This was unexpected and more than a little intimidating. She straightened her posture and tried to calm her suddenly racing pulse. "He doesn't usually participate in department interviews," Patricia explained, looking slightly puzzled herself. "But he happened to be reviewing the marketing department candidates and specifically requested to meet you." Before Eliza could process this information, the door opened. Time seemed to slow as a tall figure entered the room. The CEO's presence immediately commanded attention. Broad shoulders beneath an impeccably tailored suit, confident stride, strong jawline. And then their eyes met. Recognition hit Eliza like a physical blow. The portfolio slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, papers scattering across the polished table. Alexander Blackwood, the man she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. 5 years ago, she'd been a struggling college student working 3 jobs to make ends meet. He'd been a rising entrepreneur, already successful, but not yet the business titan he was today. They'd met at a university fundraising gala where she'd been serving drinks. Their connection had been immediate, intense, and ultimately brief. A whirlwind romance that had left an indelible mark on her heart and her life. For one magical summer, Alexander had shown her a world she'd never known. Fine restaurants, weekend trips to the coast, thoughtful gifts she'd initially tried to refuse. But more importantly, he'd seen her, truly seen her, beyond her circumstances. With him, she hadn't been the poor scholarship student or the former foster kid. She'd simply been Eliza, worthy of affection and respect. Their relationship had burned bright and ended abruptly when he'd received an opportunity to expand his business overseas. They'd parted with promises to stay in touch, but international calls had grown less frequent, emails shorter, until communication had ceased entirely. She'd been devastated, but had eventually accepted that their worlds were simply too different to align permanently. And now here he was, standing before her in this sterile conference room, looking as shocked as she felt. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his deep voice betraying the slightest tremor, "I apologize for interrupting your interview." Patricia looked between them, clearly sensing the sudden tension. "Do you two know each other?" Alexander recovered first. "We've met before, at a university function some years ago. Please continue with the interview, Patricia." Eliza fumbled to gather her scattered papers, willing her hands not to shake. "I'm sorry about that," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The remainder of the interview passed in a blur. She answered questions mechanically, hyper-aware of Alexander's presence across the table. His eyes rarely left her face, his expression unreadable. When Patricia finally announced the conclusion of the interview, Eliza felt lightheaded with relief. She needed air, needed space to process this impossible coincidence. "Thank you for your time," she said, rising on unsteady legs. "I appreciate the opportunity to interview with your company. We'll be in touch within the week regarding our decision," Patricia said, offering her hand. Alexander stood as well. "Actually, Patricia, would you mind giving Ms. Mitchell and me a moment? I'd like to discuss her thoughts on our recent marketing campaign." Once Patricia left, a heavy silence descended on the room. Eliza stood frozen, clutching her portfolio like a shield. "Eliza," Alexander said softly, her name on his lips sending an unwelcome shiver down her spine. "I had no idea you would be interviewing here today." "That makes two of us," she replied, finding her voice at last. "When I applied to Meridian, I didn't realize that this was your company." He moved closer, his familiar scent bringing back a flood of memories she'd worked hard to suppress. "You look well." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Let's not do this, Alexander. We both know this interview is over. I'll save you the trouble of coming up with a polite rejection." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "This position. Clearly, I can't work here now. It would be..." She struggled to find the right word. "Inappropriate. Painful. Impossible." "You were the most qualified candidate before I walked into this room," he said firmly. "That hasn't changed." Eliza shook her head. "We have history. Complicated history. History doesn't negate your abilities or qualifications." His eyes softened. "Unless you don't want the position." The question hung between them. Did she want the position? The salary would solve her financial problems, and the role itself was exactly what she'd been working toward. But could she really see him every day and remain professional? Could she pretend their past didn't exist? "I need this job," she admitted finally, "but I need to know it would be based on merit, not because of what happened between us." Alexander nodded slowly. "I understand. For what it's worth, your portfolio impressed our entire marketing team before I ever saw your name on the application. The decision will be based solely on your qualifications." "Thank you," she said, still uncertain. "I should go." "Eliza," he called as she reached the door. "For what it's worth, it's good to see you again." She didn't trust herself to respond. 3 days later, Eliza received the call she'd simultaneously hoped for and dreaded. She'd gotten the job. The following Monday found her stepping off the elevator onto the 32nd floor, where the marketing department occupied a spacious open-concept workspace. Her new supervisor, Marcus Chen, welcomed her warmly and introduced her to the team. Throughout the morning orientation, Eliza kept glancing nervously toward the executive elevator, half expecting Alexander to appear. But the hours passed without any sign of him. "The CEO's office is on the top floor," explained Naomi, a fellow coordinator who was showing her around. We don't see him down here much, though he does personally review our major campaigns." Eliza nodded, unsure whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Perhaps he was deliberately keeping his distance, making things easier for both of them. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into her new role. The work was challenging and rewarding, her colleagues supportive. Gradually, her anxiety about encountering Alexander faded into the background of her busy days, until the company-wide meeting announcement arrived in her inbox. "Quarterly business review," Marcus explained when she asked. "The whole company gathers in the main auditorium. Blackwood gives updates on company performance, announces new initiatives. It's actually pretty inspiring. The man knows how to command a room." Eliza knew that all too well. The day of the meeting, she chose her outfit with extra care, a professional black dress with subtle gold accessories. She told herself it was because the entire company would be present, but deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted to look her best when she inevitably saw him again. The auditorium buzzed with hundreds of employees. Eliza sat with her department, trying to focus on Marcus's casual conversation rather than scanning the stage area. When Alexander finally appeared, the room fell respectfully silent. He moved with the same confidence she remembered, speaking about quarterly results and future projections with passion and vision. His gaze swept across the crowd occasionally, and Eliza found herself sinking lower in her seat, irrationally certain he would spot her among hundreds of faces. After the formal presentation, employees mingled with refreshments in the adjacent reception area. Eliza was discussing a project with Naomi when she felt a presence behind her. "Ms. Mitchell, how are you settling in?" She turned to find Alexander standing there, looking impeccable in a charcoal suit. Up close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, subtle markers of the passing time. "Very well, thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she replied formally, aware of Naomi's curious eyes darting between them. "I'm glad to hear it. Your team speaks highly of your contributions already." His tone was professional, but his eyes conveyed something more complex. "Would you mind joining me for a moment? I'd like to discuss your impressions of our current marketing strategy." There was no reasonable way to decline. Naomi gave her an encouraging smile as Alexander led her toward a quieter corner of the reception area. "I've been wanting to speak with you," he said once they were relatively private. "But I didn't want to make your transition more uncomfortable than it might already be." Eliza appreciated his consideration. "It's been fine, actually. The team is great." "Good." He hesitated. "Eliza, I know this situation is unusual. If at any point you feel uncomfortable—" "I'm a professional," she interrupted. "And so are you. What happened between us was a long time ago." Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, perhaps. "Of course. Still, my door is always open if you have any concerns." As he walked away, Eliza released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She could do this. She could work in the same company without letting their past complicate her present. She'd overcome far greater challenges in her life. The following months settled into a rhythm. Eliza excelled in her position, earning the respect of her colleagues and supervisors. She saw Alexander occasionally at company functions, but maintained a carefully professional distance. If their eyes sometimes held contact longer than necessary, if her heart sometimes raced when he entered a room, she attributed it to the natural awkwardness of their situation. Everything changed with the Bennett account. Meridian had been pursuing Bennett Industries, a major client, for months. When they finally secured a meeting to pitch their marketing strategy, the entire department mobilized. Eliza found herself working late nights, pouring her creativity and insight into the presentation. "Your concept for their rebranding is brilliant," Marcus told her during a team meeting. "I want you to present that section at the pitch meeting." Pride swelled within her, until he added, "Blackwood will be sitting in on this one. Bennett is an old friend of his, and he wants to show personal involvement." The day of the presentation arrived with stomach-churning anticipation. Eliza had rehearsed her portion repeatedly, confident in the material but nervous about presenting it with Alexander in the room. The Bennett executives arrived first, followed shortly by Alexander and the company's senior leadership. Elisa felt his eyes on her as Marcus made introductions, but she kept her focus on the clients. The presentation proceeded smoothly. When her turn came, Elisa stepped forward, pushing aside her personal anxiety to focus on the work she was proud of. She walked the clients through her rebranding concept, explaining the psychology behind her design choices and market research supporting her approach. As she spoke, she found her confidence growing. This was what she was meant to do, what she'd worked so hard for through years of struggle and sacrifice. When she concluded her portion, the Bennett CEO nodded appreciatively. "Fresh perspective," he commented. "I like it." The meeting ended successfully, with Bennett agreeing to move forward with Meridian. As the clients departed, Marcus clapped Elisa on the shoulder. "Outstanding work," he said. "Absolutely outstanding." The team celebrated briefly before dispersing to their respective tasks. Eliza was gathering her materials when Alexander approached. "Do you have a moment?" he asked quietly. She nodded, following him to a small conference room nearby. Once inside, he turned to face her, an unfamiliar intensity in his expression. "Your presentation was exceptional," he said. "You've clearly found your calling." "Thank you," she replied, surprised by the warmth spreading through her at his praise. "I'd like to offer you the opportunity to lead the Bennett account," he continued. "It would mean a promotion to senior coordinator, of course." Elisa stared at him. "But I've only been here for a few months. There are others with more seniority who—" "None with your vision or talent," he interrupted. "This isn't about our past, Elisa. This is about recognizing excellence." She wanted to believe him, but doubt crept in. "People will talk if you promote me so quickly." "Let them talk. I've built this company on merit, not politics." He moved closer. "Unless you don't want the responsibility." "I do," she admitted. "I just don't want special treatment." Something shifted in his expression. "Is that what you think happened 5 years ago? That I was giving you special treatment?" The sudden reference to their relationship caught her off guard. They'd been so careful to avoid the subject. "I didn't say that. But you thought it," he pressed. "That perhaps I saw you as some charity case. A poor girl I took pity on." Anger flashed through her. "Don't put words in my mouth, Alexander." "Then what?" "Because I've spent 5 years wondering why you disappeared from my life without a word." Elisa stared at him in disbelief. "I disappeared. You were the one who stopped calling, stopped writing." Confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about? I wrote to you for months after I went to Singapore. When you never responded, I assumed you'd moved on." "That's not possible. I never received any letters." The certainty in his eyes made her doubt herself. "After the first few weeks, your calls became less frequent, and then they stopped entirely." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I called whenever I could with the time difference. When you stopped answering, I started writing. Weekly, at first." Eliza's mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. She'd been living in university housing then, with an unreliable mail system and roommates who'd never liked her relationship with Alexander, considering him too old, too rich, too everything for someone like her. "My roommates," she whispered as realization dawned. "They must have. I never received any letters, Alexander. Not one." They stared at each other, the weight of years lost to misunderstanding hanging between them. "I thought you'd decided I wasn't worth the trouble," she admitted softly. "That the distance showed you our differences were too great. And I thought you decided a struggling entrepreneur wasn't worth waiting for," he countered. "That you found someone more convenient, more present." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. How they'd both assumed the worst, both protected their hearts by believing the other had walked away first. "I should have tried harder to reach you," Alexander said finally. "Should have shown up at your door demanding answers. And I should have had more faith in what we shared," she acknowledged. The moment stretched between them, years of hurt and missed opportunities giving way to a tentative new understanding. But the professional setting reasserted itself as voices passed by the conference room, reminding them of where they were. Alexander stepped back, his expression regaining its professional composure. "The promotion is yours if you want it, based solely on your work today. Take the weekend to think about it." Eliza nodded, gathering her composure. "Thank you. I will." As she walked back to her desk, her mind whirled with possibilities. 5 years of believing he'd simply lost interest. 5 years of protecting herself from further hurt, and it had all been a misunderstanding. It seemed too simple, too convenient an explanation for the pain she carried. That evening, Eliza sat in her apartment, a slight upgrade from where she'd been when she started at Meridian, but still modest. The promotion would mean another significant improvement in her circumstances, but more importantly, it would be recognition of her abilities, her hard work. Could she accept it, knowing what she now knew about her history with Alexander? Could she continue working at Meridian with this new awareness between them? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Alexander. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from HR. There's more we need to discuss, outside of the office. Dinner tomorrow. No professional obligations, just two people clearing the air." Eliza stared at the message, her heart racing. Meeting him outside of work would blur the careful boundaries she'd established. But the prospect of finally understanding what had happened between them, of possibly finding closure, was too compelling to ignore. "Okay," she texted back. "Where and when?" The restaurant he suggested was small and intimate, tucked away on a quiet street far from Meridian's offices. Not one of the upscale establishments he'd once taken her to, but a cozy neighborhood place where no one would recognize the CEO of a major corporation. Alexander was already seated when she arrived, dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Without the trappings of his corporate persona, he looked more like the man she'd fallen for years ago. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "This complicates things." He nodded, understanding. "Would you like wine? Or would that complicate things further?" The hint of humor in his eyes made her smile despite herself. "Wine would be nice." They ordered, and an awkward silence descended. There was so much to say that neither seemed to know where to begin. "Tell me about the last 5 years," Alexander finally said. "What happened after graduation?" Eliza hesitated, then gave him the unvarnished truth. "It was hard. The economy tanked just as I entered the job market. I couldn't find work in my field, so I took whatever I could get. Retail, waitressing, administrative temp work. Moved 6 times when I couldn't make rent. Applied for hundreds of jobs before Meridian." His expression darkened. "I had no idea. If I'd known." "What? You would have swooped in to rescue me?" She shook her head. "That's exactly what I didn't want, Alexander. To be your charity project. Is that really what you thought of me? Of us?" Hurt flashed in his eyes. "Did you honestly believe I was with you out of some misguided savior complex?" The wine arrived, giving her a moment to gather her thoughts. "Not at first," she said finally. "But after you left, when I was trying to make sense of why things ended, it was easier to believe our worlds were too different than to believe you simply stopped caring." Alexander reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "I never stopped caring, Eliza. Singapore was supposed to be temporary, 6 months, maybe a year. I asked you to wait, to consider coming out once I was settled. You never asked me that," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "It was in my letters. The ones you never received." Frustration colored his words. "I had an apartment picked out with a view of the harbor. I'd already researched graduate programs you could apply to there." The depth of his planning stunned her. "You were that serious about us, weren't you?" The question hung between them. Had she been serious? At 21, in her first real relationship, had she understood the depth of what they'd shared? "I was young," she said softly. "But what I felt for you was real. When you left, when the communication dwindled, I convinced myself it had meant more to me than to you." Their food arrived, but neither paid it much attention. "What about you?" she asked. "The last 5 years, apart from building Meridian into an empire." A shadow crossed his face. "Professionally successful. Personally, less so. There were relationships, none that lasted. My family says I have impossibly high standards. Or perhaps just specific ones," she suggested. His eyes met hers. "Perhaps." They ate in more comfortable silence, the initial tension beginning to dissolve. As the meal progressed, conversation flowed more naturally. He told her about his travels, the challenges of expanding his business globally. She shared stories of difficult bosses, creative side projects that had kept her sane during the lean years, the small triumphs that had sustained her. By dessert, they were laughing together, glimpses of their former connection shining through the years of separation. About the promotion, Eliza said as they finished their coffee, "I'd like to accept it, but I need to know it's truly based on merit." "It is," he assured her. "But if you're concerned about perceptions, we can have Patricia handle everything. I'll remove myself from direct oversight of your department." His willingness to accommodate her concerns touched her. "That would help. Thank you." As they prepared to leave, the question of what happened next hung unspoken between them. Alexander paid the bill despite her protests, a familiar argument that brought nostalgic smiles to both their faces. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. She turned to say goodbye, only to find him standing closer than she'd expected. "I've missed you," he said quietly. "More than I realized until I saw you in that conference room." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Alexander, I'm not asking for anything, Elisa. I just needed you to know that what we had was real for me. It always was." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. When he stepped back, giving her space, she felt both relieved and disappointed. "Good night," she managed. "Thank you for dinner. May I call you? Outside of work matters." The question was careful, respectful of the boundaries she might wish to maintain. 5 years ago, she might have protected herself, might have chosen the safer path of keeping him firmly in her professional sphere. But the woman she'd become had learned that safety sometimes came at too high a cost. "Yes," she said, "you may." The next weeks brought significant changes. Elisa stepped into her new role leading the Bennett account with confidence and creativity. True to his word, Alexander removed himself from direct involvement, though she occasionally felt his eyes on her during larger meetings. They spoke on the phone every few days, casual conversations that carefully skirted around the growing tension between them. They met for coffee twice, once at a cafe near her apartment, once at a park halfway between their homes. Each encounter ended with the same restrained goodbye, neither quite willing to cross the invisible line they'd drawn. The Bennett campaign launched to considerable success. At the celebration event, Elisa found herself the center of attention, receiving congratulations from colleagues who had initially been skeptical of her rapid promotion. Alexander kept his distance during the formal portion of the evening, but as the gathering wound down, he approached her. "You've proved every faith I had in your abilities," he said, professional but warm. "Bennett called personally to commend your work." "Thank you for giving me the opportunity," she replied. "It means a lot." Something shifted in his expression. "Would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to discuss." Curious, she followed him out onto the building's rooftop garden. The city lights spread before them in a glittering tapestry, the cool evening air carrying the scent of the garden's flowers. "I've been thinking," Alexander said when they reached a quiet corner overlooking the skyline. "About us. About the past, the present, and possibly the future." Elisa's pulse quickened. "That sounds serious." "It is." He turned to face her fully. "I've respected the professional boundaries we established. I've tried to give you space to succeed on your own terms, without complications, but I find myself less and less able to pretend that seeing you every day, knowing what we once meant to each other, doesn't affect me." She swallowed hard. "What are you saying, Alexander?" "I'm saying that I would like to explore what might still exist between us, outside of Meridian's walls. But I also recognize that creates a complex situation given your position in the company." The practical concerns immediately surfaced in her mind. Office gossip, questions about her achievements, the potential fallout if a relationship failed. It would complicate things, she acknowledged. "Considerably," he agreed, "which is why I have a proposition." "A proposition?" she echoed, uncertain. "Bennett was so impressed with your work that they've expressed interest in hiring you directly as their marketing director. It would mean a significant salary increase, greater creative control, and—" he hesitated, "the freedom to pursue a personal relationship without professional entanglements." Eliza stared at him, processing his words. "You want me to leave Meridian? After everything I've accomplished here?" "I want you to have options," he corrected gently. "Bennett approached me without any prompting. The offer is legitimate and based entirely on your excellent work. I'm simply making you aware of it." Her mind raced. The opportunity was extraordinary, exactly the kind of position she dreamed of when struggling through her degree. But the timing made her suspicious. "And if I'm not interested in exploring a personal relationship, would you still be telling me about this offer?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Your career advancement matters to me regardless of any personal developments between us. I would never withhold a professional opportunity as leverage." She believed him, which made the decision more complicated rather than less. "I need time to think." Of course. He kept a respectful distance between them. "Take all the time you need. The offer doesn't expire for 2 weeks." As she left the rooftop, Eliza felt the weight of the decision before her. The professional opportunity was undeniable. But what of the personal aspect? Did she trust the connection that seemed to still exist between them? Could they truly pick up the threads of a relationship interrupted 5 years ago, or were they simply clinging to an idealized memory? For days, she weighed her options. She researched Bennett Industries thoroughly, spoke discreetly with contacts in the industry about the company's culture and stability. Everything she learned confirmed it was a legitimate opportunity with considerable potential for growth. The personal question proved more difficult to resolve. At her modest kitchen table, she made lists of pros and cons, analyzed her feelings with the same rigor she applied to marketing campaigns. But matters of the heart rarely yielded to such practical assessment. What she kept returning to was a simple truth. In the years since Alexander, no one had made her feel the same intensity of connection, the same sense of being truly seen and valued for exactly who she was. After a week of deliberation, she texted him, "I've made my decision. Can we meet?" They arranged to meet at the same restaurant where they'd had dinner weeks before. When she arrived, Alexander was waiting, an uncharacteristic nervousness evident in his posture. "I've decided to accept the Bennett offer," she said once they were seated. Relief and happiness crossed his face, quickly tempered by caution. "And the other matter?" Eliza took a deep breath. "That's more complicated." His expression fell slightly, but he nodded understanding. "I respect whatever boundaries you need to establish." "I'm not saying no," she clarified. "I'm saying, slowly, we're not the same people we were 5 years ago. I need to get to know who you are now, outside of Meridian's walls. And you need to know who I've become." Hope returned to his eyes. "I'd like that very much." "No grand gestures," she warned. "No expensive gifts or elaborate dates. Just 2 people seeing if what once existed between them can be rebuilt on stronger foundations." "Agreed," he said, a genuine smile warming his features. "Though I reserve the right to occasionally cook you dinner." "You cook now?" she asked, surprised. He laughed. "I've picked up a few skills in the last 5 years, some more successfully than others." As the evening progressed, Eliza felt something shifting within her, the walls she built around her heart slowly beginning to lower. They weren't the same people who'd fallen passionately in love 5 years ago. They were older, perhaps wiser, certainly more aware of life's complexities and disappointments. But in that very awareness lay the potential for something deeper, more enduring than their youthful romance had been. A relationship built not on the excitement of worlds colliding, but on the steady foundation of two people who had found their own paths and now chose to walk alongside one another. When Alexander walked her to her door that night, the goodbye was different. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. "Good night, Eliza," he murmured. "Thank you for giving us a second chance." She watched him walk away, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A resignation letter to write, a transition to plan, a fresh start to embrace. But for tonight, she allowed herself to simply feel the quiet joy of possibility, of doors once closed now standing open before her. 5 years ago, she'd been a girl falling headlong into her first love, unprepared for the heights and depths such feelings could bring. Tonight, she was a woman making a clear-eyed choice, aware of the risks but willing to be vulnerable again for the chance at something real and lasting. The journey ahead was uncertain, as all worthwhile journeys are. But as Eliza closed her door and leaned against it, a smile spreading across her face, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Sometimes the most unexpected interviews led to the most extraordinary opportunities, both professional and personal. And sometimes, just sometimes, life offered second chances to those brave enough to take them.